the generation today is, I mean, even though there's an argument that not everything is accessible, but because things are so accessible, it's almost blinding.
This episode is brought to you by the best-selling book, Rise of the Film Entrepreneur, How to Turn Your Independent Film into a Money-Making Business. Learn more at filmbizbook.com. I'd like to welcome to the show, Craig Brewer, man. How you doing, Craig?
I'm doing good. Doing good.
Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. And I appreciate you having a good mic, a beautiful background. I appreciate that, sir.
It's all for you. It's all for you. No, you know, I have one of these pandemic purchases, this Amazon mic that I'm sure microphone enthusiasts would say is not superior, but it worked for that whole press junket that I had to do for Coming to America, where I couldn't be in the room with anybody. Right, so right. It's fine for me.
But listen, man, I've been following you, like I was telling you earlier, man, I was following you since Hustle and Flow days. I was at Sundance. I had a 10 or 15 second conversation with Terrence as he was rushing pre-screening of them, because after that you couldn't even touch him after the screening. But pre-screening, I caught him on the street and talked to him for a few seconds. But yeah, I was there with that, and I was there.
Wild festival that was.
Yeah. We'll definitely talk about it. But first question to you, my friend, is why in God's green earth did you decide to go into the film industry?
You know, it's so funny because so not only am I now, like, I'll be turning 52 at the end of this year, but my daughter is now 15, and I think that for the and I'm very pleased to say that you know, it's Friday and she holds these screenings with all her friends here in my office space, which I have like a big, it's kind of like a little mini theater here, and she's showing John Carpenter's Halloween. And I was so proud that, I mean, she loves the David Gordon Green way, but I'm so proud that she's showing the original to all her friends who haven't seen it. And it made me think back on when I was, you know, probably about like 12 through 14 for my generation was a very unique time because, and I was trying to explain this to my daughter, that, you know, there was a time where you couldn't just see movies if you wanted to see them. There was like 4 channels, and, you know, maybe on the weekends you would get like, you know, some Westerns or something like that. But there was this explosion that happened with my father in the 80s of going down to a video store and him going like, oh my God, okay, you get, you know, you get Raiders of the Lost Ark, but I'm going to get Bridge on the River Kwai. And so, yeah, we'd watch Raiders, but then like Dad would watch his movie and I could watch it, you know? And so a lot of my love of movies really came from, that was the equivalent of me and my dad, like throwing the ball around. You know, I wasn't really that, still am not athletic or anything like that. And, but he loved movies. He loved talking about movies. He loved showing movies to me. And I think that's where it was. It was like, at first I wanted to be an archaeologist because I saw Raiders and loved it.
Yeah.
But then I saw the making of Raiders.
Yeah. Which, by the way, was one of the few making of videos other than Star Wars that was available about filmmaking in the video store times. I mean, because that was rentable. It was, if I remember, it was making Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then the second part was like a stunt man.
The stunts of Raiders of the Lost Ark. Right. And
amazing.
And around the same time, you know, was the making of Thriller, which ultimately financed Thriller. Like, Thriller was one of the biggest music videos of all time.
Still is,
and the way that the label justified it was like, okay, we'll get in the movie business. We'll make this movie called The Making of Thriller, and that'll offset it. And it became a huge hit for them as well. But it got me in the habit as a young person to go like, okay, well, wait a minute. There's this guy named Spielberg, and he made Raiders of the Lost Ark. And then here's this guy, George Lucas, who I know is the guy at the beginning of Star Wars that I would watch. See, up until then, I think, especially when I was younger with Star Wars, like, it still was that place of fantasy. You just went into a movie theater and these things just appeared. But then with the making of Raiders, I was like, oh, that guy. And then like the making of Thriller, was like, oh, Landis, this guy. And that was the beginning of like truly being like, I guess, a cinephile, where you begin to say, well, who is this filmmaker and what is their next film? And I remember my father and I standing in line knowing that we were going to see Steven Spielberg's new movie called E.T. Like it was up until then, it would have just been E.T. But to us, we were seeing that guy Steven Spielberg's new movie. And so I think that because I went into theater and I was acting a lot as a kid and writing a lot, movies was the dream. It was that thing. It's like, oh, if one day I could maybe make some movies, you know. I mean, I just didn't think that there would be anything cooler on the planet to do, and because I just didn't have all the means immediately, I started just writing theater and writing and directing plays, which completely informed directing movies for me. Staging, working with creative people, but also working with people who are probably cranky and different personalities, and trying to get actors comfortable and all that kind of stuff, I think was because of those early days of theater. But yeah, where I tell people all the time, like when you're part of that crew, that growing family of people who love movies, you know, we take everybody. You know, that's the great thing about the movie club, you know, is that you can be the popular kid, you can be the, you know, overweight kid like I was, where you just wanted to kind of like be a part of something, be a part of a big conversation. That's
awesome. Yeah, it's pretty insane. And I worked at a video store. So I worked.
Which one? Do you mind me asking which one?
No, it was a mom and pop in down in South Florida. It was a mom and pop one. Blockbuster I was working pre-Blockbuster. So Blockbuster was just getting up, but I was there for 5 years, and that's where I got my start. Like I would just consistently consume movies and play Nintendo. Consume movies and play Nintendo. That's all I did. And you're right. It was a time that hard for people to understand now that weren't growing up at that time, but you just didn't have access to movies. Like,
well, and I think the thing that I worry most about with the generation today is, I mean, even though there's an argument that not everything is accessible, but because things are so accessible, it's almost blinding. It's almost like there's just too many things to see. And but back in the day, there wasn't I mean, yeah, you could like you had your HBOs, you had like, you know, things like that, but really like you had what was coming out on VHS. Like I just some movies like Blue Thunder, you know, and then suddenly you'll get one where you just go like, oh, this cover's so great, but then you're watching like Roger Corman's Humanoids from the Deep, and I'm watching like a creature explode out of it,
or the Exterminator.
Well, that was like the big deal. Like that was the equivalent of like, you know, no, excuse me, not Exterminator. Reanimator was the movie that almost was passed around like porn. It was this thing that like, oh my God, it's so crazy. Like, don't let your parents know that you're watching this. And
that's Faces of Death, if you remember that.
Oh yeah. Well, that's like that wasn't porn. That was like snuff. That was like, oh my God. Like, I hope God isn't watching me watch this.
How did that get five sequels? Like,
well, it's where we are now. I mean, it's just, I mean, Faces of Death is where, I mean, that's live leak. That's basically, you know, when people are going online and they can look at something that they probably shouldn't be looking at.
Right.
That was the early days of that. That was like, oh, I'm going to watch that woman get hit by a train. You know,
it's crazy stuff, man. It's insane.
Really crazy. And I saw it young too. Like, it probably wasn't right. It really wasn't right for us.
Yeah, I think I watched Scarface and then Faces of Death.
That's a bang bang. You took a gut punch and then one to the face.
I was like, what, 14, 15 at the time or something like that. It was crazy.
Yeah.
But it's interesting though that you're saying that there's so much content in the world today, and you know, when we were coming up, you know, the movie star was the movie star. You know, there was a thing called the movie star, and it drove everything. And to a lesser extent today, it still does. But the movie stars that are driving things today are legacy movie stars that have been around for 25 years, like the Leos and the Brad Pitts and the Tom Cruises, you know, and those kind of, but the new generations, I think because there's so much more to watch, it's harder for somebody to become a movie star, even in a big giant blockbuster kind of thing. Like even the girl from Wednesday, which if Wednesday would have hit in the 80s, she would be a household name making Julia Roberts money every time she would walk up.
It's interesting because I have these debates with myself about that. Like, okay, are we leaving the movie star era, but maybe we're just leaving the movie star era that I knew, where right. Even though I'll still like, okay, if Tom Cruise, I always feel like if Tom Cruise is going to put out a movie, then I need to go see it. And I feel like everybody should do, because I feel like there's few people out there that I think are still have his work ethic where he is saying like, no, I'm making movies for those people that like actually work for a living and need to go out to see a movie theater. They're going out with their kids and damn it, I'm going to let them know that I'm working my ass off for them. That's kind of rare that you have someone who's like, yeah, I'm going to hang off the side of a jumbo.
Did you just see the new thing? He like flew his motorcycle up in the air, and you see and you see Chris, you see the director Chris just sitting there like, is he gonna? When's the shoot? When's the shoot popping?
I'm telling you, until you are a director, there's even there's a moment where you see Christopher McQuarrie like someone is like holding them after the set, because until you have a stunt, until you do a stunt as a director, you don't. I mean, the terror that you have that someone is going to get hurt or killed is so real. And because you're almost with every movie that you're doing, you're tempting fate for like you're inviting bad things to happen. And then you have someone like Tom Cruise who's like, yes, he's a professional and he's got like the best stunt team around, and he's preparing for these things for months. But that's just terrifying. And so I think that when audiences see that, they know that they recognize it. They go, okay, well, thank you for that. But I think the same could be said. I think that what we have now is, you have like, we are undoubtedly in the superhero. I mean, there will be a Taschen book one day where we're in this era of superheroes. Like this will be the book that's like, okay, it kind of started here with, I would say that it really started with Superman, like the original Christopher Reeve, like where they go, no, we're going to get good actors. We're going to get like even Academy Award winning actors to be in this. And it's like, really, in the comic book thingy, like, but even back then with Richard Donner, like there was this sense of like, no, we want to make like if the Godfather is to mafia gangster movies, then we want to do a Superman, like a comic book movie in the same way. And really, so you're, and I know it's been said, it's like Spider-Man is the star.
Right.
Who plays him is going to change, but Spider-Man is the star. But now I've also found that what also is the star, and which is kind of cool on a storytelling element, is the high concept of it. So you may not have like huge stars in Get Out, but everybody was talking about Get Out. It's like, and I mean, yes, you have Sandra Bullock, but I mean, I remember when Bird Box hit, and like you're now being hit with everybody going like, oh my God, did you see Bird Box? And it reminded me of kind of like, just movies back in the day where, I mean, to be honest with you, Terminator was this, because Terminator when it came out was not like that big of a theatrical hit. We discovered it on VHS because people were like, have you seen this movie about like the people are going back in time to kill the mother of the person?
There's this big muscle bound dude, and like,
it was the concept of it that there was no stars in it that we were going like, oh my God, I got to go see Michael Bihn's new movie. No, it was like this concept is driving it. And I feel that we're now here with Megan and horror, I just don't, I hope that people will still do it with comedy and drama as well. But we're in a very unique time right now.
No question, man. No question. So let's go deep a little bit into your past, sir. Your first film was Poor and Hungry, which how did you get that little guy made? Because that was your first feature, right? That was the first thing you ever did.
It was. I still feel it's my best, actually.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Because you've done some good stuff, sir.
Thank you, but it's well, and the reason why it's my best is because of what it meant to me. You know, I had moved, all my family's from Memphis, but I lived a lot of my life in California. And then I moved back after both my granddads died here in Memphis. And I moved into the house that my dad grew up in. And my grandmother was, you know, she had suffered from a stroke. And so I was kind of like helping out with that. But I really wanted to make a movie in the South. And what had happened was I just really failed a lot. Like I did what everybody did in the 90s, or what we were encouraged to do, which was, you know, spend your credit cards and make that movie. And yeah, I'm glad I did it, but it's still, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was shooting on 16 millimeter, and it just, I didn't even have the money to finish it really. And so I was really kind of depressed, and I was hanging out at this bar called the P&H Cafe, which stood for Poor and Hungry. And I started writing this movie about car thieves in Memphis, and it was a love story. And I wrote it, and I sent it off to my dad, and who was always really supportive of me. And he read it, and he just gave me like this great, you know, hey, get back in there, you know, don't be afraid of not having money, celebrate the fact that you don't have any money, and just get one of these. This is like 1997, 98. So he was like, get one of these like small digital cameras, and then edit it yourself on a computer. And I suddenly was inspired, and I went out, and I didn't go to film school or anything, but I did have a Barnes and Noble. I worked at Barnes and Noble, and I had a discount there. So I got all the books I could on digital filmmaking. And then I came home and found out that, you know, my guy from my dad's work called and said, your dad was complaining of chest pains, and we rushed him to the hospital, and he died of a heart attack very unexpectedly. Like, we didn't know there was, he wasn't really like a, you know, he was a pretty healthy guy. So, but it rocked me a lot. It rocked me that he was 49, and I was, you know, I was like, you know, in my, I think I was 30, and it just kind of rocked me on a mortality level, you know, well, I always thought there was time, you know, and I got about 20 grand of inheritance. And my mother told me, you should try to make that movie that your dad was talking to you about. And so I went out, I just had like my brother-in-law and my wife at the time and my sister-in-law, and we all lived in this teeny little crappy house in Memphis, and we were making this movie with everything we had. And I cut it together all myself on Adobe Premiere, and learned a lot about filmmaking from that movie. But then that, you know, that movie not only opened the door to Hollywood for me, because it played the Hollywood Film Festival, and it won an award. And then I got an agent, and the agent asked, well, what do you want to do next? And I was like, well, I made a sequel to Poor and Hungry called Hustle and Flow. And it was going to be, it's in the same crime world in Memphis, but it, you know, has the same kind of heart that was in my first movie. And then Stephanie Elaine, who is the producer of Hustle and Flow, and then John Singleton, read the script, but then they watched Poor and Hungry, and John was very much like, well, this guy's a regional filmmaker. He's from, you know, he's doing a movie about Memphis and in Memphis. And if this movie Poor and Hungry just had money behind it and stars, you know, or at least name actors, you know, it could probably, you know, go somewhere. Yeah. And so when you watch Hustle and Flow, it's really about me. And I mean, it's us making that first movie in that crappy house, no air conditioning, doing everything we can.
But instead of music.
Yeah. That's basically what it is.
And from, you know, because I remember when Hustle and Flow came out, I was coming out with my first film that was going through the festival circuit and doing all of that stuff as well. It was 2005. And I mean, when Hustle and Flow hit, because I was at that Sundance, and the insanity. I mean, this is Sundance 05 is a very different Sundance than 2023. Like, it's right. It had more power back then. The market was different. There were still DVD sales. There was all sorts of stuff that was happening back then. But I mean, it's one of those, you know, in the 90s, every week there was a new, you know, a John Singleton, a Robert Rodriguez, a Kevin Smith. So in the early 2000s, Hustle and Flow hit, and it was an explosion in the indie space. So there was a lot of talk about it. And I remember because John the late great John Singleton, when he was doing the rounds, I was like looking like, how this Craig guy get this thing made? How did he get this cast? How did John Singleton get involved? And then I remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, in one of his interviews, he's like, well, the studio wouldn't give me the money, so I put up the money.
He did.
He actually, which is one thing you never do as a filmmaker, is put your own cash in at that level. And he's like, no, I'm going to write a check because that's how much I believe in this. And he gave you your shot. It was pretty remarkable. It's unheard of. It's really unheard of in Hollywood.
Oh, it is. I bring it up all the time. Like and it's interesting you bring that up about just the culture of Sundance at the time, because I was reading all those books that were about like there was even this one book, and I can't remember, but it was kind of like tracking the growth of Sundance and then the growth of Miramax, I believe at this. And it's really interesting because, and this is what I have to give myself credit for like trying to just read all the books that I could, because I learned a lot about how it worked. And I'll never forget, it was like 3 a.m. in the morning, and the bidding war is happening after that first screening at Hustle and Flow.
Oh God, that must have been amazing.
And I mean, to watch that go down was crazy, but I'll never forget the moment where this guy, Richard Klubeck, who was one of the agents that was negotiating for John Singleton, and he turned to me and he was like, so what's important to you? And I said, well, I only have 2 requirements. One, that nobody changed the cut. The cut is the cut. That's the movie. We won't be changing that. And I want no options. And they were like, wow, how do you know about options? And it was because I'd read these books. And what I knew about these books was that like right around the time of like late 90s into the 2000s, Harvey Weinstein had figured out a new model where he would buy these movies, but he was kind of buying the filmmaker. So he would buy the movie, and then he would make you sign. You would be happy to sign it, but you would sign basically a negotiated, what your next 3 films for Harvey at a negotiated price or a set price, excuse me. So even if you suddenly were Guillermo del Toro and you became like Guillermo del Toro and you had no movies that Harvey Weinstein wanted to make and you wanted to go to somebody else to make a movie, then Harvey would make a deal for himself to get him out of that contract. And so I had read about that and I was like, I don't want that. And then, John put his house up for collateral. We made the movie for under 3 million. I mean, we made the movie for about $1.9 million. I remember I shot it in about 23 days. We did like 6-day weeks here in Memphis. And we even had like, it was called modified low budget scale, which means that if you had more than a certain amount, percentage of actors or actresses of color, or if they were handicapped, then you got to be in a different bracket. And so we really made it for very, very little money. And then John had this big, $16 million deal that he got out of it. And I always tell people, it's like, yeah, but that's what risk rewards you with, because everybody tells you don't put your own money in these projects. And John put his house up for it. He'd joke with me every day, you better make a good movie or my kids are going to go back to public school. But I really have to give it to him, because it's not only that he took a shot with me, but he really mentored me. I mean, he knew that I had filmed a movie just all by myself with like a video camera in my hands. But then he would really kind of like come over to me and just go like, we got to make our day. So if you really had to shoot this next scene with 3 setups, what would what would be those setups? And that's when I started to learn how to marshal a day,
Right. That's the thing that they don't teach you very often in school, or if you're doing your own indie, is like, you can't make your day. If you're like quarter page out, third of a page out after day 1, after day 3, the whole thing is going downhill. You won't make the movie. The movie's done. You have to make your day. You have to make your day. You have to make your day. And it's always compromise, isn't it? Like you show up with like this beautiful shot list of like, I'm going to do these Spielberg shots with some Scorsese and some Coppola and maybe throw a little Hitchcock in there. And at the end of the day is, all right, we're going to get this in a 1-er. We're just going to put it on sticks.
Yep.
Everyone act 5 minutes. Yep. Let's go.
Oh, it's so stressful. It's so stressful. And you think we'd learn, You think that
No,
we'd get
no.
better at it. You think that it'd eventually go away, but it doesn't. It just, I mean,
I always
I've heard so many stories of like really like accomplished filmmakers that still weep,
oh yeah,
on set
oh
because
yeah.
they just couldn't get that last shot that they think that they needed and was so crucial.
I always love going on when I'm on a set. First day with my first AD, I love bringing this like it's stupid shot list, like stupid. It's like it'll never happen, but they don't know me, so I'll give it to them, and then there's that awkward conversation. They're like right before the first shot, they're like, can I just talk to you about a couple things? The first AD. I'm like,
can we discuss the work?
I mean,
Yeah.
so there's 128 setups here. I go, I know they're just there, and I'll pick and choose as we go, but they're there just in case.
I have to say, I don't do shot lists.
Oh, you don't? I don't
and
as much anymore.
I'm sure I could and should. But I find that you really do have to show up on that day and find out what the day is bringing you. And really all that prep that you did the night before really could go right out the window. And you really do sometimes go like, oh, I think I am going to have to do this in 2 shots. And what would I have to do in 2 shots? Because you're marshaling the day. And there's been a few times where, a studio head is saying like, I remember they always send someone else. They send some minion to say like, well, this studio head was wondering if maybe you could make some shot, if you did your shot list the night before, and I'll say, who suggested that? And they get all nervous and everything like that. And so I understand it. I'm a very agreeable guy, but I just find that unless you're doing like a stunt sequence, you're doing something that definitely needs something like that. But otherwise, I kind of like just to get there with the actors and figure out how we're going to do it right then and there.
And I would agree with you too. Early in my career, I had a little bit more gusto in me, and I would do all that kind of stuff. But later, as I started directing more and more, you just kind of get an instinct for it. And you come on set and you just go, oh yeah, let's put it over here. Let's get this over here. Like, yeah, give me a 32 here. And you just figure it out on the fly.
Yeah.
But if there's something special you want, like, you know what, I really want to do this kind of fun way. And I'll bring maybe a few shots that I'll talk to the DP prior to it to kind of set it all up for it. But yeah, I don't do the 100 as much anymore because we know.
Yeah. It's like, it's going to go right out the window really. But I do feel that, I mean, I'll tell you when I really felt like I learned how to direct was I had already made, 4 features. And then I started in on Empire, like directing television. Like I'd done like about 3 pilots and 1 episode of The Shield, but to go into like episode after episode after episode on Empire, I understood Spielberg better. Like, cause I'd read everywhere that like Spielberg really cut his teeth on television, early television. And that's when I felt like for the first time I was a director, because there was a sense of me not being important. I mean, I know that sounds a little contradictory, but like, you can't say like, well, I want it this way. They're like, well, okay, have it your way. But if you're not done, we're going to get someone in here that'll do it because you have 8 days and that's it. And that really, I started thinking differently, like something as simple as extras, which is never simple. But like when I'm on a feature, sometimes I'll be like, well, I got to have 300 extras, obviously, for the scene. And then you argue and argue and argue and argue. And
it's 20.
Right. And then but in television, there's no discussion. They're like, no, you have 20. That's what you're getting. And you need to figure it out. And so then it starts exercising these different muscles in you. Then you're like, okay, well, wait a minute. What if we just do this like with a long lens kind of pointing down this hallway, and we just pack this hallway with the 20 people and we don't really see that we just have 20 people. And then that's how we'll create a cluttered space and I don't know if I would have felt that way or done that if I just got what I wanted and it just had a bunch of people in there. And so when I went to do Dolomite Is My Name after all that, and everybody was so like, worried. They're like, man, you're going to be working with Eddie Murphy, and are you scared? And I said, actually, I'm really not. I really feel like Empire has prepared me for this moment, and I already made a bunch of features, so I felt very confident going into that movie.
Let me ask you, what was, working with someone like John on Hustle and Flow, and him mentoring you, what was like the biggest lesson you learned about filmmaking or writing from John? Because I mean, John's just such a legendary filmmaker. I watched Boys in the Hood, I mean, thousands of times. It was just such a masterpiece of a piece of work.
John said something I will still hear John in my head on set. And one thing that he said to me that I really took to heart was, and he punches when he says, he's like, shoot the meat, man. Shoot this scene, make your master not just some little stupid crawling across, like, that slow, you see it a lot in TV. It's like a master that's kind of moving a little bit. Oh, yeah. but yeah. He believed that you needed to make your master like Spielberg does his oneers. That if, and I'll never forget what he said. He said, you got to shoot the meat, you got to shoot it good, because you never know what may happen. You may lose half your day because an actor, like, something like may hurt himself, or like, thunder comes along or lightning, and now you've got to shut down. And you want to be able to know that if people turn the lights off on you, you've got your scene. And that was a big one for me. That was like, he was still of that. He really loved cinema. And so if you look at John's movies, from Four Brothers, every movie he does, yeah, he is a classic filmmaker. Mm-hmm. Now, and what I mean by that is that there's a lot of filmmakers today, and God knows I can be just as guilty of it, where it's kind of like you're just kind of shooting heads. You do your master, you do your medium, and then it's just like you're just hoping that the editor kind of like creates the rhythm of it, because you're going to cut to that person, then you're going to cut to that person, cut to that person. Where John was very much like, no, how do we stage this within the single, where everybody, you get the story told and people are moving within the frame. Mm-hmm. That's like John Ford. That's Wells. That's Weiler. That's all those films that he watched and studied. And I still, every time I sit with my director of photography, I do kind of go like, okay, I know I'm going to pop in for some singles here and there, but if we had to shoot the meat, how would we shoot it? And
I love the meat thing. That's great.
It's so John. It really is. But I think that was probably the biggest lesson. And then, also to just trust that it's funny, because so much of our advice usually comes pre-post. Right. All the advice that everybody wants, like, how do I get a movie made? And then, like, how do you direct? Right. But no one ever really gives you advice about the whole editorial process. Right. Mm-hmm. And John, I remember I saw the first edit of Hustle and Flow that just the editor, cut. And I'd never seen anything like that. That's the first heartbreak of a filmmaker, is when you've been dreaming of your movie, you've been watching dailies, and now you're watching a very rough, raw assemblage of your movie. Yeah. It doesn't have the music cues that you think it needs to have. It doesn't have the pacing. But worse than that, it's now real. The rubber is hitting the road. It is no longer in fantasy. This is what you have. And now you need to make something out of this. I pulled over on Olympic Boulevard and I sobbed so hard that snot was pouring out of my nose. It was so bad. And then and John calls me up. He's like, what's wrong? It's like, I've just totally messed up this movie, man. I just, and he's like, you just watch the edit assembly. He's like, oh, shut up, man. He's just, get on home, go to sleep. Everything's going to be good. Get in there and everything. He always kind of just kept me in this perspective that I think when you get older, or when you've made more films, you begin to see like, okay, I'm about to go in, I'm about to watch this cut. I know it's going to drive me insane, but relax. And that's the other big lesson that he gave me.
Marty still does that. Marty still, after the first cut, he goes, "This is horrible. This is crap." He walks out, he's like, "This is garbage. This is absolute garbage." And then Thelma has to bring him back in, and it's okay, Marty. It's fine. It's fine. It's all that kind of stuff. Now, I always wanted to ask you this question, man. How in God's green earth did you get Black Snake Moan made? Like, that is the most insane concept. It just, wow. Who put money up behind that? I know you had a little heat from Hustle and Flow, and that probably helped. But man, that's still a pretty risque film.
I would like to really give credit where credit is due. And the reason that movie got made was because of the late Brad Gray, who ran Paramount. Now, Brad, his first order of business at Paramount, this was before he took over at Paramount. It was like what Sundance was like in January, and he was taking over like in March. But John was very smart, and John had 2 prints of Hustle and Flow made. So he had one at Sundance, and he had the other one playing simultaneously in Brad Gray's private screening room. And knowing full well that he kind of wanted the movie to be at Paramount, right? So before Brad even became official, like on the clock, so to speak, he was watching Hustle and Flow, and he told everybody, like, "I think you should try to go buy that movie, because MTV and BET, we could really use the Viacom machine and all that kind of stuff." So then what happened is that they made a deal with John, right? And the John deal was the purchase price of Hustle and Flow was in 2 categories. It was, they purchased the movie for $9 million. But then they made a deal with John Singleton where he got 2 what are called put pictures, which means, like, kind of no matter what, he can make a movie as long as it's under $3 million. And he had 2 of those because he brought Hustle and Flow to Paramount. We brought it to them numerous times, and they passed on it. And we just wanted $3 million. And now they paid 9 for it. And so he was like, "Hey, I want to make more of these." And later he made one called Illegal Tender, where he just wanted to have complete control over his movies. When they bought that movie and they made that deal with John, they thought that I was a part of it. But remember what I said earlier? No options, right? I didn't want anything on it. So I will never forget this moment where, because I wrote Black Snake Moan before Hustle and Flow was made. Mm-hmm. And while we're flying back to LA from Sundance, I saw 2 people reading Black Snake Moan. And I thought, oh, this is that heat I've been hearing about. Like, this is that thing that maybe I have a shot there. So John really loved it, and Stephanie really loved it, and they knew it was crazy, and yet they also saw what I wanted to do with it, because it was very much about like connection and anxiety, and there was a heart behind it. It wasn't just like exploitation, even though it was kind of like a blues fable. But we started meeting with other studios, and then we got Sam. And then Brad Gray was like, "Well, wait a minute. Why is he going off to make a movie somewhere else? We just bought Hustle and Flow, and it's going to be coming out." So they go, "Well, you don't have a deal with him." And he's like, "Oh." So I'll never forget going over to his house. I'll never forget this. The ivy, there was an ivy wall. I was like calling his assistant going like, "I think I'm at his house. I just can't see anything." They go like, "No, we see you." And this wall of ivy moves. And when it moved, it revealed this just really muscular African-American guy in a black Armani suit with black sunglasses and an earpiece. And he had a Rottweiler that was right next to him. That was just, it was like you were entering like a cartel, Uh-huh. And I come in, and Brad comes out, and he goes, "Okay, you want to make this Radiator movie?" That's what he called it. And I said, awesome. And he goes, "You sure you don't want to do something else? I know that like we can, there's all these kind of properties that we have, and we can put you on it." And I said to him, "Well, I've read a lot of books about filmmakers in my position. And the way I see it is that I think that the second movie always is kind of a risky thing, and I'm pretty confident that I could probably get a job as a director doing, franchise stuff or other stuff later on. But I really feel like I should use this time to get something made that normally wouldn't get made." And he said, I respect that. And he goes, well, he goes, I don't, how do you put it? I don't bet on races. I bet on horses. And he goes, so we're going to make Black Snake Moan. Is that fine? Let's just, can we just say right here that we're going to make it? And I go, if you want to make it, sir, then absolutely. And he made it, and he was proud of it. And people were telling him he was an idiot for doing it. Why are you going to do this? No one's going to come see it. And nobody came see it. But I always think about, there's that day that Paramount called and said, look, we've got Footloose and we really want to do something with it. Do you think you could do it? And I was like, yes, sir. Cause I felt like this was me going like, I told you guys I'll be there for you on something that maybe, may not be about chaining people to bluesmen's radiators and that's how we did it. I'm so proud that it exists in the world, because
thank you.
I now just feel like I definitely don't see a world where a theatrical release would have been attempted on something like that. I can see like maybe Black Snake Moan being at a streamer or something like that. But even then, it's going to be a little bit wild to get that done, because, you would get the kind of studio notes like, oh, what is this? What kind of tone is it? But
that movie doesn't get made today. There's no way that movie gets made today.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely volatile,
There's no way that movie gets made today. I'm glad that there's certain movies like that I'm glad they exist. I think Tim Burton's Mars Attacks is one of those films for me.
Yeah.
When I walked out of there, I'm like, man, I don't know what just happened, but I'm glad it exists. I'm glad that movie got made. And there's a handful of those throughout cinema, but Black Snake Moan is one of them. It's like, there's just no way that gets made today. There's just no amount of heat allows that film to get made in today's environment. And it was tough in that, 15 years ago.
Well, and it came out, it was such an interesting year, because no one really, like, the movie industry was changing. It came out in 2007, and that was like a real pivotal year for what was happening on a global level. So, you were making movies that China had to play, and South America had to play, and even Russia. It's so funny how, like, the very people that now are so much in the news right now, 2007 was all about trying to make movies for them.
Correct.
And so, you had Carnahan's movie, I think Smoking Aces was coming out at that time. You had Death Proof at the same time, along, with
Quentin Robert,
with Forbidden Planet, and none of us did well in the audience. Like, none of us. Like, it was a bad move for Quentin.
Well, Joe, I've talked to Joe about Smoking Aces, and he still says he makes more money off of Smoking Aces now than he's made on anything.
It's so funny that worked out. So here's what's interesting, is that the head of Paramount Home Video like called me up and just said, we want you to know something about Black Snake Moan. And I was like, oh great.
Here it comes.
They're like, Black Snake Moan not only did double our expectations, it not only tripled our expectation, it quadrupled our expectations, which means to say, and I go, yeah, people probably don't want to go out to a theater to see this movie, but they're dying to watch it at home. And so I've always felt good that I've yet to really make anything that like cost a studio money. I've at the very least broke even.
Right.
And
exactly.
And so I'm proud that I have that movie behind me.
Yeah, and in a time where it came out in a time when there was still home video.
Yeah.
That was a real revenue generator.
And now what's so strange is now there's that meme of Sam from Black Snake Moan.
Yes.
Where he's just kind of blinking, like looking kind of like with the white hair, and that gets sent around. I remember talking to a class of my daughters, and I brought that up, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we use that all the time. That's from your movie." So they're just looking at a frame or like a series of frames because he's blinking and moving a little bit, and they don't know what it's from. But it has its own life. I mean, the same thing could be said for here in town, our Memphis Grizzlies, our basketball team. Whenever we go to the playoffs and we're like really in the mix, they start playing that song from Hustle and Flow, Whoop That Trick. and 20,000 people start chanting "whoop that trick." And I found out that like my daughter and all her friends, they didn't know that was from Hustle and Flow. They just thought that was the thing you said at basketball games. And that's what's so interesting about the generations today. They'll get a clip of something or they'll get a little bit of it, but they don't know that it's got this history, that it's connected to. It's literally like visual hip hop, you know?
Right. No, absolutely. Oh yeah, dude. That's that's remarkable. Now, listen, all the times you've been on set, what is the craziest thing that ever happened to you on set? How did you overcome it as a director? On any of your films?
Well, what are the ones that I want to talk about?
I was at publicly. Yeah, publicly. What can you say? When we stop recording, you can tell me the other ones. But for right now,
I've got two I can tell you about that. Well, you know, let's see. What is the craziest thing that's ever happened? Oh man, you're stumping me there. I mean, I think there's always been there hasn't been something that that of course that I can talk about that would be like completely like derailed a production or something like that. It would always be like happy accidents or something like that. So I'll tell you just the craziest night I've ever had on set was in Hustle and Flow. There is a scene at it's a roller skating rink here in Memphis called the Crystal Palace, and it was outside, and it had this glorious like neon sign that lit up. And I really wanted to do kind of like a cruising scene where everybody's out there with their cars that I'd sometimes see on the weekend, where they're like they're hopping their their pump cars and everything like that, and just hundreds of people there. And basically everybody said like, you got to figure out another way to do this because there's no way we can afford all these extras and there's no way we can get a car like this. And John Singleton was like, absolutely not. So John went on 4 different radio stations that day and said, hey, we're making a movie. You want to be in my movie? Then you come out to the Crystal Palace, you bring your ride, you bring your car, and hundreds of people showed up for that.
Fast and Furious style.
Totally Fast and Furious style for no money. Like we didn't pay for those cars. Those cars just showed up. People just wanted to show off their cars. All those extras, all those people. And as the night started going on, and then the weed smoke started like just getting thicker, at a certain point, John was getting so excited. But I remember like grabbing John, and at a certain point, I like grabbed him by the shoulders and I was like, am I in South Central right now? He goes, no. I go, where am I? He goes, you're in Memphis. I go, no, you're in Memphis. You're now in my community. And I'm telling you, we got half an hour before something pops off right now because it's getting like way too unhinged. And people are like I'm seeing like a couple of arguments happening here. And John, we've got one security guard, because that's all we could afford. And like, we weren't that big of a movie, but I swear to God, like that was the night that I thought that everything that was just going to explode. And every time I see that shot, it looks like we have so much money. It looks like we cast.
I remember that shot. I remember that shot.
It was so reckless and so amazing that John just went on all these different radio stations and said, you want to be in the movie? Show up. And I mean, we had like people down the block trying to get into the movie, and it was a scary night. But that was like the night that I felt like, man, I'm running and gunning as like a filmmaker. It's awesome. It was scary.
And one last movie I want to ask you about, man, is Coming to America. I mean, arguably, in my opinion, the greatest comedy ever made. In my personal, I quote that. I can quote every single line in that movie. It is a masterpiece at every level. Every level. So how did you approach attempting to make a sequel to a masterpiece like that? Because it is absolute masterpiece, the first one.
It's funny because I'm far enough away from Coming to America 2 that I can kind of like think about the whole experience, because it was really wild. First of all, like I did them back to back. Like I did Dolomite Is My Name, went right into Coming to America.
Okay.
And I remember Eddie asking me to do it, and of course I was like, well, how do I not do that? Because I mean I'm such a huge John Landis fan. I mean like everything, like the Blues Brothers, and I mean I can quote every line from Three Amigos to you. But I remember talking to Jody, the director of photography on it, and we were I can't remember where we were in a van, like a locations van, and we had made like 10 episodes of Empire together, so we were close, right? And Jodie's Black, and I kind of leaned into him and I was like, you know what we're doing, right? We're kind of doing Black Star Wars. And he goes, that's exactly what we're doing. And it was like this moment that we kind of like had to say it. And what we meant by that was, coming to America means so much to everybody. That it's really going to be held to the standard that's very tricky to navigate with it. And so every time we would come to decisions about coming to America, because it's the first time I've ever actually, I've usually developed movies or written a movie, and it was the first time really that I've ever come on to direct something that had been moving for like probably about 5 years or something like that. And I remember just thinking, like, you would talk to people about, you know, Coming to America's coming out, and everybody would say like, well, are the barbershop guys going to be in it? Is Randy Watson going to be in it? They would just constantly come at you with like, well, it better have this, it better have that. And,
absolutely.
And so you realize that you're tied to people want to have that experience again. They want to see those characters again. And that's when like I began to kind of relax a little bit more with the daunting nature of like doing a sequel to something that's so perfect. It's just going like, you know, I'm not here to replace Coming to America. I'm here to like make a movie that everybody can come to have some fun seeing these characters again and have a good time. Yeah. And what was so strange about it was I just couldn't wait for a theatrical experience of it. Cut to, it's a pandemic. And now the very age group that would probably lead the ticket sales is my age group, and
sure.
and you're and so
yep.
and we're the ones that are, no matter what, not going to a movie theater, you know. And so one day I get a call that Paramount has now sold it to Amazon, and Amazon did this enormous campaign for it. Yeah, I mean, it was, they were wrapping airplanes and flying flags all over the world. And so it launched on a Friday, and I remember getting this call from Amazon saying, you got to get on the phone right now. We're having an emergency meeting. And I was like, oh, damn it. Now here we go. What's wrong? And they get us all on the phone. They said, we had a 30-day goal, and we achieved it in less than 8 hours.
You mean viewership?
Yeah.
Of course, because everybody wanted to go see that movie. Everybody.
And what I found out was that like not only were everybody watching it, but then like kind of what Jodie and I were talking about on that day is like, and what we really want is that, see, Coming to America is this movie that's just been playing on TV and actually like some and you know, mass TV, meaning like all the swearing had been taken out of it and everything. So you have kids kind of watching Coming to America. So you had like 3 generations of people watching Coming to America during a pandemic where they just wanted to kind of like have a good time. So people were having watch parties with the people that they felt comfortable with. And it was and for one weekend in my life, the globe was watching this movie. Like the entire world was just watching it. Yeah. And so I felt good about that. I felt like, okay, well, we had like a good time with Coming to America, and we had some good entertainment, and we made Amazon's, you know, biggest hit at the time. And then just try to like, you know, keep in mind that there's going to be haters with it, like everything. Like that's why I meant about like Black Star Wars. It's like it was this thing that people are so precious with it that that you're gonna get people kind of hating on things, but I didn't let any of that affect me or anything, and just had a good time.
But you also had a little bit of experience with that with Footloose, because when you redid Footloose, I mean, that's a precious 80s movie. It's like
it is
classic 80s. And I remember because I was in the Ellen screening room, because I was at Ellen that day for whatever reason with my wife, and they're like, hey, you guys want to watch Footloose? I'm like, cool. And so we went off and watched Footloose for 2 hours, and you came out, and the first words you said were, why would anybody want to remake Footloose? Like, it's perfect. Like, I said the same thing, everybody. But then you're like, well, I did this and I did that, and it's a little bit different here and there. Because, but I wouldn't want to try to remake Footloose. You
Here's what,
can't.
here's what's so funny about Footloose is it actually got a lot of really good reviews, and it the audience scores were always really, really high on it. But I understood people going like, why would you, how dare you remake Footloose? Because I am a huge fan of the original movie. But now here's what's kind of interesting. Like within the last couple of months, Miles Teller became this phenomenon on TikTok with 13-year-old girls.
Of course.
I don't know what Miles did I mean, he's been around for a minute, you know, but something happened in this TikTok world where every one of my daughter's friends are like, oh my God, Miles Teller. And I was like, are you talking about Miles? And they were like, oh my God, Miles Teller. And they could not get enough of Miles Teller. And then I started kind of like hearing from all my daughter's friends just going like, yeah, you know, Dad, no one ever watches the original Footloose. And I was like, well, that's sad because you got to watch the original Footloose. It's the one I grew up on. It's Kevin Bacon. It's John Lithgow. You know, it's Diane Weiss. You know, you got to see it. They're like, no, but it doesn't have Miles in it. It doesn't have, you know, and so Footloose is having like this wild renaissance right now, and the soundtrack is being sold, and it goes back to like that Kevin Smith bit of advice that I still think is the best bit of advice for every filmmaker, which is every movie has its day. And it may not be the day that the studio wants it to land on. Like he has this great conversation that he always talks about Mallrats, that like he made Clerks and then he made Mallrats. And not only did nobody come to see it, but critics always crapped on it and everything. And, but then now he, you know, many years later, there's these kids that come up to him and just like, oh my God, you know, you made Mallrats and it means so much to me. And he's like, really? Because like, it was really kind of like a thing of pain with me back in the day. And I know that with like Black Snake Moan, and I felt it like I wish Footloose maybe was like a big hit. It did okay. But like you then later, like years later, so you know, something will just kind of like connect
all of a sudden. Yeah, all of a sudden.
And so I'm very, very happy about all of my daughter's friends. Like that's the poster I'm signing. I'm not signing Hustle and Flow. I'm signing my remake of Footloose, which I find hilarious.
It's amazing how this world works sometimes, my friend. It's really amazing. Now I'm going to ask you a few questions to ask all my guests. Sure. What advice would you give a filmmaker wanting to break into the business today? I
mean, first and foremost, the hard thing that we all just struggle with, which is truly like a discipline, like to every day treat it like it's a job, even though no one's paying you. To how can I learn more about the business? How can I, I think you should read trades if it helps you know who to go to. You don't want to pitch all your movies to one place. This place may, you know, today A24 is going to want to hear one pitch and Fox Searchlight may want to hear something else. Like you need to know where you're going. And sometimes that means like really being informed, reading as much as you can, and writing every day. If writing is a part of your world, which I think it should be, because I think if you really want to break into the business, you got to write your way in. That's the leverage that you have. And it also just informs you as a director. You learn about storytelling more through writing, as well as directing. But really, like the hard one, the really bit of hard advice is, do you really know who you are yet? And I think for young filmmakers, that's always a little bit nerve-wracking, you know? And what I usually do is I'll show them like, Spike Lee's, We Cut Heads, right? I'll show Sofia Coppola's short film, Lick the Star, right? And then I'll show Following by Christopher Nolan. And or Pi from Darren Aronofsky, right? And just ask questions of like, can you see their later films here? And usually you can, I mean, even that 15-minute short that Sofia Coppola made with these girls in high school where they've got the star on their, that they've drawn on their hand, and they say lick the star, and it's like the girl says, what is that? And she's like, oh, it means kill the rats, backwards. But she had like cool pop and punk music in it. It was fashion forward. You saw like, if you turn the lights out on Sofia Coppola after that short, you could go like, oh, she's into fashion, she's into this particular type of music, she's into this dynamic of narrative. And I think that's hard for young people who are hungry to get into the business, to allow themselves the time and the effort to find what those elements in themselves are. You look at an Ari Aster movie and you go like, oh, I think I know this is an Ari Aster movie, right? Mm-hmm. But that's him finding it. You know what I mean? And I think that the mistake a lot of young people make, and what I mean by young is not necessarily young, but like young in the business trying to get into it, is they want to get in and get paid. They want to get in and get financed. And I just sometimes say like, do you? Because, really the best way to be a filmmaker is to step in crap every once in a while. And that's when you learn. And you don't want to be doing that with like a bunch of money hanging over you, where this town may say like, hey, we shouldn't have hired that person. You need to make some crap. And that's where the flowers grow out of, and that's where you learn like, oh, okay, you know what? I think I don't really do these oneers that I'm seeing and all these things. Oh, you know what? I think that maybe slow motion isn't my thing. I mean, I know that's cool in that action moment that I saw in like 3 movies that I wanted to copy, but maybe my thing is this thing that I do. And I think that's the biggest bit of advice I'd give to somebody, because that doesn't require people giving you a bunch of money and you knocking on doors. That may be you going like, okay, well, what are the movies that I feel like are me, and what is my life experience about, and what are the stories that I feel that I want to tell, and like kind of like my dad dying. I think that's why that movie was so important to me, is that for the first time I was thinking about, okay, well, what if this is my last movie? Not my first. It would be my first and last movie. So what do I want like my son to know about me from this movie? Right. What's the soundtrack of it? What's the look? Where's the heart and soul of this movie, and where does it land? And I think that is something that people can figure out without some sort of like door opening for them into Hollywood, and they'll respect you more if you know who you are once you get into the business.
Very much so. Very, very much so. What is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in the film business or in life?
That this too shall pass. Yes. It's just hard. You experience something, and it's harmful to you on that day, and you just think that you're done and you're destroyed.
It's over.
And you've the gig is up. They know you're a fraud. And
well, that's a given, isn't it, though? Isn't it? Well, don't we always think we're a fraud? I mean, everyone.
Absolutely.
If you're a good artist, you do.
We're making make believe. How can we not feel like a fraud? But I think that I'm lucky that like Hustle and Flow was right when Twitter was happening, but it wasn't at the point of Twitter where people could like crap on you with such virtuosity as it's done today, and with anonymity to some extent. Mm-hmm. And I think that really like now I'm finding like no I'm good. I'm gonna move on to the next. I saw a documentary on the stage director Hal Prince, and he does something that I was like, oh, I'm doing that, which is on his opening night of his musicals, which is on a Friday. He schedules a breakfast the following Saturday with his collaborators to discuss his next show. And I was like, that's a Mac move, because that shows you that you are in the flow of being a creator, and your worth is not completely based on the success or failure of what you just made. You're in an arc that is going over decades. You're not in an arc that's going over a weekend and whether or not people are going to go see your movie or go see your show. And I think that's probably the one that as I come into my 50s is like, you know what? I'm a little bit better with handling. Okay, now I gotta deal with judgment and opinions that seem to be everywhere.
Oh yeah. Okay. And toughest question of all, 3 of your favorite films of all time.
I know my favorite, which is Purple Rain.
Oh, so good.
Purple Rain. I mean, I really think that Purple Rain for me has now surpassed Star Wars and Raiders in viewing. Meaning, I usually show it to my casting crew before I start a picture. I do tutorials sometimes on the first 8 minutes of Purple Rain. I think the first 8 minutes of Purple Rain is brilliant. Mm-hmm. It's all set to Let's Go Crazy, this extended version, but you really know who your protagonist, you know that there's going to be a love story, you know that Morris Day is going to be a villain, you know how everybody feels, and you kind of even know what everybody wants, and the music never stops. But the editing and the visual set, you see, I think like 3 tongues within the first minute. Like you know that sex is going to be a part of this, and it's kind of got this interesting look with these very like quick little shots of just people in a frozen state. Like they're not freeze frame, but it's just so creative and inventive. And I know that people go like, "Oh, Craig, like the acting and all," and I was like, "Yeah, but it's kind of larger. It's kind of opera."
It is,
you know, and you got to just kind of like go into it with that opera feel. So if I were like on a desert island, it would definitely have to be Purple Rain. But I still think that Godfather is just, it's hard to deny that those themes of family and how much you're going to sell your soul to protect your family and to thrive. Those themes are just so universal, you know, and I showed it to my daughter recently and she loved it. And I was like, man, that's just that. It's funny that this movie still can move people. And then the third one is John Sayles made a movie called Mate Juan. That is just a perfect movie that I really try to urge as many people to see and that I can. And I had a great honor to be able to work with James Earl Jones, where I got to tell him how much his character of Few Clothes meant to me when I was a young man. And he has a great monologue in it that begins with him saying, "You shut your mouth, Peckerwood." And it's just, it's just the best delivery of just smacking down some white hayseed that's calling him, you know, that's being a racist. And it's just power. But and it's like, you know, Chris Cooper's, like, I think it's his first movie, really.
Yeah, it is.
And you know, and so many people are in it that are just wonderful. But those are my 3.
And I'll tell you, when I had John on the show, and it was like having a masterclass listening to him talk about story and directing. And he gave some of the best directing advice. Oh God, like he would just some beautiful little tweaks, just little nuggets that you just go, oh, that would be you know what, I'm doing that next time. Oh, I'm doing that next time. Oh, it's
so funny how film people, and especially film directors, we still just need to collect all those little gems. We you know, and the one thing that I always try to urge, you know, the newer crop of cinephiles that are coming up, it's like, you know, you got to look back, you know. I'm glad that you love, you know, I know that you think that Dark Knight is a classic film and I'm not saying it's not, Roger, I'm not saying it's not. I love Dark Knight, but actually I'm going to show you this movie called Heat.
Oh, you read my mind.
You know, and by the way, there's probably plenty of people that'll be like, okay, but I'm going to now show you this movie, Craig, Rafifi, like,
or Thief,
or Thief, which is I just watched that recently. But yeah, it's like it's endless how much cinema there is that we have to learn from. That's just further back than necessarily what is now. You know, and I would love to have been in the room with John Sayles and learn all that.
I mean, no, it's well, you could watch it at any time. I'll send you a link. It's a 90-minute tour de force of him talking about Lone Star, how he did the oneer in Lone Star, like, you know, just the scene switch midway. I'm like, John, how'd you do that? And he's like, wow. Oh, well, we had this guy and he fell down and he jumped out of this, because it just in the one shot, it's a transition of like, you know, 3 decades or something like that. And And I'm like, how'd you do that? Because it was low budget, there was no CG. And he's like, oh yeah, well, you did this. And then we had the guy run around and he did that. I'm like, oh, and I'm not sure if it was John who told me this, but I heard this somewhere. He's like, when you just about to yell cut, hold on for 3 more seconds.
You know what? I learned that from editing my own movie, because you want to, and it just takes one time for you to learn it. And that is like, I wanted to just do a really slow dissolve, but I noticed that like I had somebody holding an image, holding a thought, and then you could see as the slow dissolve was happening, you could see them go I called cut too soon.
Right. And you just never know what they'll do too. Sometimes just a little magic happens. You got to leave that time for the magic. Craig, I could keep talking to you for hours, brother. I appreciate you having this conversation with us, and hopefully it'll help some young cinephiles coming up behind us. So I truly appreciate you, and thank you for all the amazing work you've done, and continue. I can't wait to see what you come up with next, my friend.
Oh, thanks so much. It was great to be on with you today.